enacting it.
And then enacting it.
But again, I don't want to sound like a lecturer here, but I'll say it again. Look at historical precedents. I mean, if you had told, white people and black people in the U.S. in the 1950s they should live as equals, and have people say, yeah, but 300 years of slavery, how are they going to accept them as equals? They've suffered so much. But on the other hand, it can be done.
They're beginning to do it.
I mean, the historical transformation does take place. People don't stay stuck in people live with their experiences and build on them, I think, but they're not stuck in ruts that are forever, irreconcilable. I think you have to keep that in mind.
Do we take a couple
Is that upbeat
questions?
enough? Was that upbeat enough?
That was very upbeat. Okay, so we have time for 5 minutes of questions, and I want to be the first to jump in here, and then I guess you're going to be. But things are starting to shift a little bit. There's for example, a Tel Aviv history professor named I'm going to forget his name, but I know the name of his book. It's called "When and How the Jewish People Were Invented." And his basic theory of historical research is that, in fact, the Jews were not exiled 2,000 years ago by the Romans. So this whole story that they were dispersed around the world and lost, and they came back to their homeland after 2,000 years of being in exile is totally false. And this is an Israeli historian. So that, things are shifting. Shlomo Sand, yeah. Shlomo Sand. When and How the Jewish People Were Invented. It's actually coming out this week. So I think Shlomo Sand.
Shlomo Sand.
S-A-N-D.
Yeah, and it's called The Invention of the
When and How the Jewish People Were Invented is the correct text.
Russia Today gave him a good 10-minute interview online. You can find it on Russia Today.
You had a question?
Yeah, I had a quick two-part question. Regardless of the narratives or historical claims, consider, I'm throwing this out partly rhetorically, but doesn't it ultimately come down, this issue or any other in the world, to an issue of, as far as economics, politics, and military capacity, an issue of might makes right, namely the most powerful power wins ultimately. And if so, the second part, kind of addressing the late 19th century, early 20th century vision of this, quote, greater Israel, Eretz Yisrael. Why shouldn't Israel ultimately, under that vision, stretch from the Nile to the Euphrates River?
So is the first question an ironic question? Do you mean that ironically or not?
No, actually address it as literally. As realpolitik.
It's not. It's just historically, it's not true. I mean, look at the Vietnam War for one quick example. Look at the Soviet Union and Afghanistan.
Weak people win.
It's not true that power always wins. It has never been the case. In fact,
If the Israelis thought it was correct, they would do much worse things.
The South African army was infinitely more powerful than the ANC, and yet it lost. Right? The U.S. could have wiped out Vietnam a billion times over, almost literally, and yet it lost. The British Empire was infinitely more powerful than India. It lost. So the French army was much more powerful than the FLN in Algeria. It lost.
The Haitians defeated Napoleon.
I mean, this is over and over and over again. What history is one defeat of power, which doesn't mean the power, wilts away and just goes. It's always ugly when it's forced back. But historically, that has always been what has happened. I mean, that's what history is all about, is the defeat of power. So I don't think it's true at all that might makes right. Even in realistic terms, other than moral terms, of course, but realistically speaking, it's never been the case that power just wins because it's powerful and can blow people up. It's just not how it works, ever. As far I can't think of a case where it has worked like that, at least in the long run. It just doesn't seem to work. So then, we go back to what can make things happen. And again, the South African precedent shows that when people force governments to act correctly, governments change policy very quickly in response to popular pressure. And that's what happened in the 80s, and I don't see why this should be different this time.
Following on that train of thought, if people power is what it really takes to change things, what my question is about the whole issue of the PR propaganda war that you mentioned, Amy. Historically, I don't know if there's a time in history where there has been the ability to have such a strong PR propaganda war that Israel has right now. we all agree that they looked quite bad, Israel looked quite bad after what happened in Gaza in January. And yet, they're extremely sophisticated. The government is extremely sophisticated and has a great deal of resources to wage this amazing propaganda war. Propaganda in the sense that, you know, they have this new propaganda that's called rebrand Israel. Every time you open a magazine up, there's this whole, you know, wonderful spread on Israel, whether it's Time magazine or whether it's the, you know, the in-flight magazine that you're on or wherever it is. So how does this collide with people power when people are, here in the United States specifically, are not informed because of the propaganda?
Can I begin a response to that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad that you said in the United States, because I don't believe this propaganda is successful outside the United States. Both sort of the governmental spokesperson propaganda, nor really the vacation idol is successful outside the United States. And as a university professor, I'm not so sure it's that successful inside the United States. I believe all change comes from students and young people. And on my campus, now my campus is fairly strong in terms of Muslim community at UC Irvine. But it's really, the students there are very, I won't say militant because now that has conjured something bad, but they're very strong about teaching and having happenings and demonstrations, the Muslim Students League. And I think it has an effect. I mean, certainly the Jewish forums try to paint them into a corner and try to portray them as liars, but it has an effect that I think can be felt around the university, and I believe on campuses elsewhere. But what do you think, sir?
I think at one point it was right to speak of Israeli propaganda as being powerful, but that's only because it wasn't being opposed very effectively. But I think now to say that the Israeli propaganda juggernaut is a serious force to worry about, it's become a joke at this point, seriously. I think nobody takes it seriously.
For the average American?
For more and more Americans. And I think the phenomenon of Jimmy Carter's spectacular success that's already almost ancient history at this point. But the phenomenal success of Jimmy Carter's book on Palestine, despite the fact that he was savaged in the mainstream media and by all the leadership of all the political parties, that book was a spectacular success at the popular level. And if you read the LA Times, what I read always in the LA Times at the beginning of every day is the letters to the editor. Consistently, you see normal people writing in saying, "This doesn't make any. We've told this story. It doesn't make any sense. There's something wrong with this story." So I think that the idea that the Israelis can pull the wool over people's eyes indefinitely is they're dreaming. That's what they think they can do, because I think their time has passed in terms of this giant propaganda juggernaut. I think it's not to be taken that seriously. I think they're desperate and they're clutching at straws and they're not going to get anywhere.
One more question.
It seems like the only campaign looks appealing and maybe is working is the BDS, and that will be boycott, divestment, and sanction on Israel. And it seems like it worked with the South Africa apartheid, and I believe that is going to work with Israel, but maybe it's going to take another 10 years. But eventually, that's maybe the only solution to the Palestine, Israel. When I mean the people of the world will stop Israel from doing it and force a solution, which is just solution for everybody.